What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. This is the Elder Scrolls podcast. I'm Scott, here with Michael and Drew, as always, and today we are discussing magic. So magic in the broad sense. We're going to talk about how it works, all the basic sort of fundamentals, and yeah, we'll go through it all. So who wants to start us off with what magic is?
Well, Magnus tore a huge hole in the sky, and magic comes through it.
Along with Magicka as well.
Yeah, so basically they're making the world, all the original spirits, you know, there's the ones that sit out the Daedra, the ones that join in and become part of it all, and then the Magicka who basically, I don't know, wig out, just leg it into the sky, tearing holes in it, creating the sun and the stars.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing.
And from there, from Aetherius, magic leaks through, available for use.
Because magic is very arbitrary and ambiguous, so it's like the gods are innately powerful in a magical way, and they're using their power or magic to create this mortal realm. And you know, Magnus is there drawing up the blueprints for Lorkhan's mortal realm, and then he realizes that all of the involved Aedra are going to have to invest a huge amount of their power in keeping this thing running and keeping it alive. So he's just like, oh, I want no part of this. And he just, you know, yeets himself into the sky. All of his followers go with him, which if you look at the night sky, there's quite a few of them. And they just tear rifts straight through the skybox. And yeah.
Yeah, and that's how Magicka flows in, and that's where you get the source for all of your traditional magic, because there are other sort of magical, powery things that aren't like Magicka-centric, like the Thum or the Shihai or the Ki if you're an Akaviri, or tonal architecture and stuff. That's more like universal principle bending kind of magic. It's a little bit different, so we're going to mainly focus on Magicka-derived magic. So... Yeah.
So basically, you could almost describe magic as just like an energy that's in everything. The type of magicka that you're talking about, it's an energy comprising of, you know, it's in every living being, and it can be kind of manipulated. It's kind of just like
Metachlorians, bro.
It's energy manipulation in the most basic sense, right?
Yeah.
So there's like a whole bunch of different ways you can play with this energy, and they become the schools of magic. As you know, you categorize them and learn to do different things with them. But really, there are no schools of magic per se. It's more just like a arbitrary classification that mortals like to put on it to make it easy to understand.
Yeah, it's all there for gameplay purposes, so you can like up your skill in destruction as opposed to restoration or conjuration. But like the way they're sort of described in the lore is that the schools were sort of made by the Mages Guild institution, and when they're sort of focusing on teaching it. So the importance of destruction and illusion versus alteration are all there for their ability to teach. So you can sort of narrow your focus on using Magicka to do certain types of effects, you know, such as the elemental ones for destruction. And then it's as, you know, in the same way that you go to a normal school or university and you have codified sort of classes and like, you know, different miniature subjects and stuff like that. It's a similar principle to that, and we've seen them sort of fluctuate. And prior to Mages Guild and stuff, there was a lot more like kind of whatever going on. Like
they tend to overlap as well. There's a lot of areas where you're like, that could easily be a spell in another school. It's just kind of as I've said before, it's very arbitrary. It's just as a means to make it easier to focus on.
Yeah, it's kind of like you were using that example, Scott, of a normal school, but you can see how topics in science and maths obviously overlap with each other. And I guess from a lore perspective as well, in terms of you learning the skill, it doesn't really add up between games, but you can look at it like the way that you learn a skill is there's going to be similar spells, right? Or similar kind of groupings. So it's easier for you to do that. So what I'm trying to explain is if you have 70 conjuration, you're good at soul trapping because you've already been playing with souls.
And it's interesting though, because even like soul trapping, like that's an example of one spell that has moved from mysticism to
that's what I mean. It doesn't necessarily make sense when you look at it from a gameplay lens, because back in the day you could be good at conjuration, but bad at mysticism if you didn't invest anything into it. So
it's like with all gameplay elements, it's always good to just really view that as, okay, this is necessary for the gameplay structure and stuff like that, rather than taking it as a super literal form of that's how the lore is. In the same way that there aren't people who are carrying like 50 health potions on them and popping them in 4 seconds mid-battle. So that's important to remember. But I guess some of the earliest records of magic in history and is some of the early elven stuff. We have the Aelids and their supposed creation of alteration. Now, alteration isn't as we just got done saying, it's all arbitrary. So it's kind of like, it's not necessarily even a school as we know it, but I guess the idea of what the law is trying to convey there is some of the fundamental principles. So maybe some are like sort of the shielding, the levitation-y type things, or maybe some stuff like that is some stuff that they sort of pioneered by comparison.
It's like a way of simplifying how you can look at alteration. Is it's very much about just kind of like almost modifying the laws of physics and nature, which, when you say that, you could probably apply it to every single school, but that's the general gist. So like you've got things like levitation and water breathing, which is a good example with when the Aelids were being tracked down by the Elysians. There were a group of them hiding in Bravil, right? I think it was Bravil. And they're like, when they go in, a bunch of Imperials get slaughtered, but they can't find the people doing it, and that's because these Aelids are levitating up to the walls or hiding under the water and just water breathing. And then whenever nightfall comes, they'll come out and murder a load of Imperials and disappear again. And that's kind of like the beginnings of their alteration spells.
It's a bit like a land grab in a way, isn't it? Like you're the first person to think, oh, I can manipulate energy in this way.
It's very much discovery rather than invention, I'd say.
Yeah. Or just like a creative harnessing of the same energy everyone else is already using to do magic with.
And I guess some become more relevant as later. Like you can imagine schools like Conjuration became more relevant as time went on, because originally you have the Daedric princes sort of just walking freely on Nirn and stuff like that, and you don't have this sort of firm barrier between Mundus and Oblivion, as is then created by the deal with Akatosh, the pact with Akatosh and the Dragonborn Emperors. So so later on you sort of need more powerful conjuration mages to summon them here through that barrier, basically, like or things like that.
Imagining the early days of discovering magic is really fascinating to me, because like when in the Malefic times, when the Aelids and the Dureni are two good examples, are kind of dabbling in these arts. There's so much mystery to them. You just don't realize how much danger can be involved. You've got the Dureni kind of founding the school of conjuration, and you just imagine that they don't really know what they're doing, but they're like peering into the cavernous darkness of Oblivion and the void, and just like not knowing what's on the other end.
Though I'll throw another idea there, is that like we were sort of talking about in the Kalpa episode, as you kind of get further away from the divine, as things move from the mythic to the mundane, there's lots of evidence to sort of support the idea that people back then, while like on maybe like a physical technology level, they might not be as advanced. In some cases they were though, but they were in fact more magically advanced. When you have some of the great feats of the Dwemer, the Aelids, and the early people, things that they can't repeat now. So maybe there was, because they were closer to the time of gods and stuff, they actually did have a more innate understanding of magic, but it actually becomes more obscured as time has gone on and things are becoming more mundane.
I guess something else I was going to say, very similar to that and kind of adds to it. What if the classification and the almost boxing of magic into different schools actually limits the creativity and of using and manipulating magic, and that's why we don't have as many interesting and mysterious things anymore? I mean, if you get a person new to magic and the approach, instead of this is energy, you can use it in all these different ways, and they're kind of playing around with it and being creative, versus here's magic, there's 5 schools, this is what each school is, you can get better at each of these abilities that are limited to this, and this. The way that you think about it actually limits you.
Well, adding order is adding limitation, isn't it? Like even when you imagine the creation of the mortal realm, they're drawing up the schematics of this from like raw creation energy, and they're putting limits on it to make it the mortal realm. The mortal realm is full of limitation.
Talking about that actual idea, it's kind of interesting the sort of intuition magic versus sort of the science academic kind of understanding of it. And like you were saying, Michael, just that could like limit someone's there's reason to assume that some of the earlier people and so on, being closer to the time of the gods and stuff like that, understood magic more intuitively. Like just kind of things like you hear about Nords and the clever men, and it's just a very general sounding thing, or they don't have like, oh, I am like the archmage of a this and that of this school with proficiency in XYZ. It's kind of a less academic look at thing. And if you actually, it's not so much the Magicka magic, but like, things like the Thum and Shihai and all that, they're very intuitive, not...
Well, to follow on from that, you could use that as a good example of why mysticism as a school isn't really commonplace anymore. Because when you look at how mysticism is described, it's very much that intuitive experimentational thing. Like there's a quote here that says, mysticism seems to derive power from its conundrums and paradoxes. The act of experimentation, no matter how objectively implemented, can influence Magicka by its very existence. Therefore, the mystic mage must consign himself to finding dependable patterns within a roiling imbroglio of energy. So it's very experimentational and very, just going with the flow and trying to find patterns from nothing.
Well, that's how... Because it's funny, because like mysticism is like, obviously the Psijic Order are renowned for that, and that's their sort of like really obscure, like crazy magic that doesn't really sort of fit into the more typical things. But the other thing about mysticism being, mystical, they actually, a lot of its science originally was to do with, not science, magic was to do with soul manipulation, and that's where Manamako splits off. He starts using manipulation of the souls in a sort of dangerous way. So it's a very powerful magic, but necromancy now is very commonly associated with conjuration because of gameplay functions. But back in the day, it was a real sort of mysticism kind of thing with soul trapping and the manipulation of souls. But there's some crazy, I really love sort of the mysticism as a school and some of the potential behind it, because it gets to that really like crazy possibilities.
All I'm thinking of is that meme I sent you guys ages ago with all the massive warriors with spears, and it's like intuition, feelings, and in the background magic's running in. We should remake that, except put Psijic faces on all the big guys and have them killing little Imperial college mages.
But it is true, and I wonder, do you guys know I know it's where it's from, but there's a Sotha Sil quote, I think, in regards to mysticism, I think, or understanding the world. It's something along the lines of, he's saying, first you need to see one layer beyond, and then there's another layer behind there, or something.
I know
like
the
that.
exact quote you're looking for. Which I'm not going to be able to find now. But yeah, go on.
Because obviously, like Sotha Sil even taught at the Psijic Order and stuff as well, and had his sort of, he's got all his mystical ongoings and stuff. But
it is a shame that we don't see the mysticism spells like reflect damage anymore. I really hope they bring more effects back into Elder Scrolls 6, along with spellcasting. Spellcrafting.
Yeah, I think they should have. I reckon they should honestly bring mysticism back. Unlikely that they will, but I think that they should and flesh it out like it was before. But like we were saying in other examples of arbitrary kind of things, is like how Paralyze has moved from illusion to alteration, or I'm pretty sure in Oblivion the fire shields and frost shields and stuff are an alteration school thing. But then, the similar equivalent would be like the cloaks, but they're in the destruction school. But you can see how they could kind of be in either, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, a cloak is way different to a shield, because one's causing damage and one's protecting you from it.
Yeah, but even the idea that there's an element involved kind of falls a bit more into the destruction school.
Yeah.
As opposed to a normal shield. But that's the thing. Like we said, it's all arbitrary.
I do like to kind of headcanon it in the lore a bit, as for some things, you can't do it for everything, but with Paralyze, for example, you could easily say that it's different methods of achieving the same thing. So with alteration, perhaps you're using magic to literally change the, I don't know, for lack of better words, the cells in their body to be immobilized. Whereas with
or like a stasis or something.
Yeah, like a stasis spell. But with illusion, it's actually tricking the brain into thinking it can't move. Almost like sleep paralysis.
I was just going to say that's the exact distinction I try to make between alteration and illusion, is that, illusion, even though the mind, you could argue, is part of nature and like the laws of physics and all that, it's like illusion is specifically messing with the mind and it's making you think something has changed, versus alteration where it literally has changed. But, you can do that with just about every school, is find the connections and differences.
There is a book called Proposal Schools of Magic, and this is sort of written in the second era, like Elder Scrolls Online kind of time, and it's a proposal to change the Mages Guild study program. But it's an interesting distinction between alteration, which is the distortion of local reality through direct imposition of the mage's will, to include spells like paralysis, water breathing, water walking, yada yada. And flame cloaks as personal elemental shields such as flame cloaks. But then there's also mysticism, the class of spells used to alter the nature of magic itself, to include effects that dispel or absorb both spells, telekinesis, stuff like that. But that's interesting that it's actually changing magic itself as opposed to alteration changing the like physicality of the world, kind of. You know
Well,
what I
and
mean?
while you were on mysticism, I found that exact quote you were talking about with Sofa Sill.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but it almost raises more questions than any answers. But it says, "There are layers to understanding all things," said Sofa Sill. "The common man looks at an object and fits it into a place in his way of thinking. Those skilled in the old ways, in the way of the Psijic, in mysticism, can see an object and identify it by its proper role. But one more layer is needed to be peeled back to achieve understanding. You must identify the object by its role and its truth and interpret that meaning." It's like, okay, cool. I'm even worse at mysticism now than when we started.
But that is really cool. Like mysticism, I think, and it's probably just because it's so mystical, but it's one of the coolest schools, and because the Psijic Order is super powerful and they're proficient in it, so you sort of like assume it's.
I can see why they took it out, though. I can definitely see it. Like, for example, when I used to play Oblivion, when I first started playing Oblivion, I didn't really use it much. And in the builds that I did use it, it felt like there wasn't enough to the school. Like, you could end up doing some really cool things with it, but there definitely wasn't enough there. I guess the difference is it's a lazier choice to just move that into other things, as opposed to, hang on, there's not enough here, let's add more to mysticism so the use is actually incentivized, versus being just like, no, let's get rid of it because we didn't do it well enough.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I wish they did flesh it out. But you can see how it kind of can get a bit bloated. Like back in the days of Daggerfall, there was the Thaumaturgy as well, which is magic that affects the will and personal state of mind, to include spells as calm or charm and stuff like that.
Basically,
even levitation,
illusion. Yeah, it was weird.
which involves the personal rejection of gravity. I can see that going but. So that's magic that affects the will and personal state of the mind. But that's differing to sort of illusion.
That sounds like
I guess.
mini Kim. It's like, I choose to believe gravity doesn't exist, so I'm going to float.
So that's the way I see Thaumaturgy. It's kind of like, even though it's magic in the same way all the others are, it's very much like performing miracles. Which, most magic is, in a way, you could say it's performing miracles, but it's kind of almost got that, that mythical sense to it of just performing a miracle out of nothing is kind of what Thaumaturgy is.
Like teleportation. I mean, it had water walking. Etherealness, so like the become ethereal shout. You can imagine someone using Thaumaturgy-based magic to just become kind of, untouchable. For a brief moment of time, at least.
And then we have also, illusion, altering the perception in oneself or others. So spells like light, invisibility, fear, frenzy, silence. This is also just one stage of the school's evolutions. Like, we know that the spells have sort of ebbed and flowed in between different schools. But as a general rule, you can kind of summarize it that illusion is altering perception of people or yourself. Then there's sort of alteration, the sort of physical reality, mysticism, crazy and mysterious, and like manipulating the nature of magic itself. Then we have some of the other ones. Conjuration, which is the summoning and binding of spirits from oblivion or Aetherius, actually. It says, even Aetherius. But to include soul trapping as well in this one. It didn't before. And I honestly think that's a point for me. I think from a lore perspective, soul trapping and necromancy is much better through a mysticism lens, because it's about the manipulation of the soul, whereas like conjuration has been very related to conjuring from another plane. Like it's in the name, like taking a data from another plane rather than. But I mean, I guess you can maybe try and rationalize that by explaining like taking a soul from Aetherius and bringing it back to its body or something like that. But
Yeah.
you know, it gets tricky. A lot of magic. This is airy fairy floaty stuff all around.
One thing I was thinking with talking about illusion again and invisibility, I don't think it is, but you could almost see that as in other people can't see you, but you are there.
Yeah.
Like a representation of that you're tricking other minds that you're invisible, but really you're not.
Because you could make the argument that like that sort of like chameleon, like active camo looking thing from Halo is more of a feeling of alteration, like physically making you like that, versus what invisibility is trying to convey is that you're making people not able to perceive you.
Potentially.
You're entering their mind.
When it's in the illusion school. I think when it's...
Yeah.
It hasn't always been in the illusion school, has it? Invisibility?
I think
for some reason I
think it has.
Invisibility.
Or maybe in early ones, but I'm pretty sure it was in Oblivion at least.
If I type in invisibility, let me have a look. I just remember something, I could swear it was in the alteration school in one of the games. Let me have
But they move it around. Well, while you're getting onto that, like we can also mention things like, destruction, which is elemental thing, using force to destroy things, and restoration is obviously the sort of opposite of that, using it to, heal.
So I think the most interesting thing about destruction and restoration is finding the similarities between them. So, for example, with destruction, you've got all your typical damage dealing spells, but then you've got people like a mage called Vexis Velruan, who became addicted to the purification process of using destruction to like cause pain, to just like to deal with. So say, for example, because I'm going to word this poorly, is like say you need to cauterize a wound, that feels like restoration. But if you put fire magic destruction spell on a wound that needs cauterizing, you're using it to heal, which is kind of what this mage was delving into. And then with restoration, you have the kind of sun-based spells, which deal damage, but because you're dealing with the undead, it's almost like you're restoring them from this undeath, from this cursed, corrupted state.
Yeah, to like a proper dead.
Yeah,
kind of thing, like a living dead. It sounds weird, but like a, as it should be, not undead.
You're almost
reversing undead.
It's like imbuing them with mortal life, so they go from undead to just dead. You just pull them back a stage. I found the invisibility thing. It seems to have always been an illusion thing. But in my head, like if you put it in alteration, you can easily see it as in like light bending. Like how you have spells like mage light and things like that. Just a bunch of reflecting of the light around you so that you don't seem to be there anymore. Like a magician would do with mirrors and things on a stage.
Also, with destruction, we about the shock, frost, and flame stuff we hear all the time, but there's other parts to it as well. Like I guess you would simply, like as you see like people doing water magic or dealing with other elements, you can assume they're all sort of any elemental kind of attacks are generally going to be destruction. But some cool parts that they got rid of, like disintegration, was a really cool. It's just like raw destruction. But understandably, you kind of need armor with a repair rating for that to function in game. So there's no point of having it in Skyrim unless they had. And to be honest, as cool as it was, I'm kind of happy not to have to use repair hammers. It was kind of just I'm happy to just keep it as it is.
It was pretty cool though. I mean, this sounds kind of strange, and I guess it wouldn't really work. But if you had a system where you could still destroy the enemy's armor somehow, I just really liked the idea of being able to smack someone with a disintegration sword until their armor just broke to bits. Or their weapon broke to bits and they had nothing to attack you with anymore. But I guess now that just gets replaced with things like disarm shout, or.
Well, yeah, maybe that's a spell that they could. Like, I'm sure I'm sure Elder Scrolls 6 will sort of like make some of the shouts and stuff into cool, unique spells instead, because they don't.
They could have. They really could have anyway.
Yeah.
So I can definitely see that, like things like Ice Form for sure, as a destruction spell.
Yeah, and just because you haven't seen a spell before, like obviously there's things like, oh, the Telvanni are said to use magic to grow their towers. Like, what spell is that? Or what, do you know what I mean? It's very loosey-goosey, because all it really is you using your will to reform magical energy into some desired effect. So it's not like, you know, it's all gameplay systems to go, this costs 32 Magicka and this one costs 100, whereas like even when you think about it in terms of elves that have like Magicka boosts and stuff like that, it's like you just sort of imagine in from a lore sense, it's like, oh, they just, you know, are able to harness Magicka easier. They just have a more natural inclination towards it, versus like they have exactly 100 extra Magicka points.
Yeah, it's just like an increased affinity for a certain skill, which is the manipulation of this energy leaking through. I also like how Destruction has the draining attribute type spells, or the, you know, like you can take down someone's ability to use their weapon, or take down their ability to use a certain type of magic.
See, that's the biggest problem that getting rid of attributes did, is because through manipulation of attributes and spells and enchantments and stuff, you could make yourself really cool and powerful. But not only that, like, you know, if you cast some like drain speed or something on someone, all of a sudden they're like super slow, or things like that, or maybe, you know, their endurance, and it just like takes their health bar down heaps. Like all of these cool applications of magic kind of disappear because they got rid of attributes. I think attributes, even if you just had attributes in general and didn't even change sort of like you didn't have to like add any more than there was in Oblivion, you could still like mix it around or like rebalance things.
Well, to be honest, there's no excuse really, because they could have had drain and absorb skill based things still in Skyrim, and they could also have had it with the stats like they did with enchanting. Like, you know how you can make a sword that absorbs stamina? Why can't I have a spell that does that? You know?
Yeah.
You should. There's no reason. It's not OP or anything. You just have to balance it right.
Yeah. I can understand, like, if they wanted to clean off anything, keep attributes, but they could have even the drain skill thing, like, like, it's kind of like, I feel like if you use it, it's not even worthwhile, like, the Magicka it costs to just drain their, like, you know, sword skill by 20. It'd be a better thing to instead, like, I just think the attributes have a more cool, like, functional effect. And like, even, like, silent spells, where did they go? You know, stuff like that, being able to just stop mages for a moment. Like, because then you could make this really cool build, like a specific mage killer that basically specializes in silence type spells and stuff like that, and tools to kill mages and or, what do you call it? Not paralyze, but, there's another word for it. Anyway, I'm trying to like put them out of action so they can't have access to the magic and you fight them. And there's just a lot of cool applications there that we don't see.
And also consider that the limited amount of spells, like they reduced it in Skyrim, actually does limit enchanting, which was made to be a really cool thing in Skyrim. So you can imagine a character, for example, you could enchant a bow with a silencing enchantment. So you can kind of shoot a witch from afar with your bow, then, like, you know, as a way to turn off their ability to use magic, or things of that nature become really cool when you put enchanting into the mix. On that topic, I also miss enchanted arrows. I know the idea that like an enchanted bow kind of does it all, but having an arrow that you just find on a bandit that has like a damage health effect, or even there was arrows that put light on the enemy as well, so you could see where they went.
I don't know why they couldn't do it, because it's people go, oh, you know, why would you waste a soul gem on an arrow if you can just do a bow? But like, if you could, maybe if the magnitude was changed around a bit, like common soul gems were more effective, or also it could be like batch done in like a group of 20 arrows.
That's what I was
thinking. That enchants 20s.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So that'd be really cool for any sort of witch hunter kind of
I wouldn't
build.
be surprised if that was like a UI thing in gameplay, was just to stop you cycling through different types of arrows. So they just wanted it to basically mean you equip this bow, you're going to get that effect, versus like, oh, you know, I want to shoot these arrows here, now need to go into the menus, equip this one. A lot of it I think does come down to gameplay, which, I mean, like, and continuing on from that, you know, it's kind of like, it's, everybody knows that especially Magic has been kind of dumbed down as the games have progressed. But do you think now that it's got huge mainstream appeal, you know, Skyrim compared to Morrowind, they can start adding a lot of stuff back without the risk of just being a niche game?
I think they were just trying to like, Yeah, I don't know if they were. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they were actually worried about mainstream appeal as much as they were just trying to like simplify things because they had to spend more time on all of the other elements that they wanted to do. But I wonder if they should. I've just forgotten what I was going to say.
Well, I was going to say that it helps with balance as well. You know, they don't have to think like, bows should have less potency for enchanting because people are going to double them up with an enchanted arrow, which is going to be like super powerful. It's just easier for them to make, at least. But it would be cool if they somehow did a system where it all worked together and you could have enchanted arrows and stuff, you know?
Yeah. I wonder if they will add back. What do you think, if they will or not add stuff back?
It really
Like some
depends on
complexity.
what.
Oh, that's what I was going to talk about. Here's the idea. This is what I remembered what I was going to say. I was talking about how in Oblivion you had the whole quick cast system, which adds a lot of build like variety and stuff. You're playing a paladin character charging in with a great sword, and then you can just quick cast a sort of spell or things like that. Or if you're playing a battle mage, it adds a lot of. It really does make a lot of builds really cool and making magic easier to use rather than the hand system and the dual cast stuff. But on the flip side, it really does emphasize every character should kind of have magic, or you're kind of underusing your potential. Whereas in the reverse, you know, because I kind of like the visual of the hands and the holding it and stuff like that.
I also like the touch magic as well. They need to bring back
Yeah.
touch magic so you can just palm someone with a frost spell and it does more damage than if it was ranged for the same cost.
Yeah, we've speculated before anyway that you could use both. They could implement basically a quick slot system of magic. So if you do want to be the battle mage and you can quick cast, but that becomes at like a lower magnitude or lower effectiveness of the spell. So maybe you take like, I don't know, just 30% cut to the or more or something to what the spell would be if you had it equipped. So the advantage, so it kind of mitigates the advantage of you know, so there's a point to equipping them in your hand.
Yeah. I mean, you could also think of it the opposite way. Instead of making the spell worse, is that if you choose to prioritize both of your bare hands for magic, is that it makes it more powerful.
Yeah.
You know, it makes it stronger. And then you could even have a system, if you wanted to knock out the other issue, where if you're a warrior, see, it works the same way. Instead of, okay, fine, there's incentive for pure mages, but you've still got that issue of if you're a warrior, you still may as well have a spell there to quick cast. Instead, have a system where if you choose or elect to have no spell in the quick cast area, that you'll be more effective with your sword. Just a little bit, you know what I mean? So you don't have that ability to just tap C and cast off a fireball while you're holding a claymore.
Here's another thing. You could even use it like potentially as like a, if you have nothing equipped with, say, a sword or something, it can almost be like a quick strike or something. Or you could even have it as almost essentially that it's like a magic/grenade button, not for grenades, but imagine bringing back things like throwing darts and knives and stars and stuff like that, just throwable. So it's quick things. So you can be, if you want to make some ninja kind of character and you're going around like, you know, assassinating, and you just want to press, you know, RB or something on a controller instead of a spell, quick cast spell, you just quickly throw a star or something like, or whatever things you've got.
And then if you choose to just hold these throwing stars in your hands, then they would be better. Somehow.
Or you fire them quicker or something. Like you can, or same. But you could also do that for like Bannerlord style with like, you can have throwable weapons like throwing axes or like javelins and stuff. And I think that's something that people would really enjoy anyway, just bringing those back in general.
It can feel a little bit complicated, but let's be real, we've all been waiting a long time for the Elder Scrolls 6. So the combat system will not be like, I just can't see it as being how it is in Skyrim. Like it has to be enhanced beyond. Look, don't get me wrong, I love the hack and slash kind of feel.
I hate it.
But I feel like
I hate like the combat gameplay of Elder Scrolls games. It's like the one thing I would never play it for, if you know what I mean. It's just I hope they really revamp it completely from the ground up, you know.
I mean, I like it.
It'll be interesting to see how they do it with the first person stuff. Like, what are some examples of things? Because I mean,
that's the thing. I don't want For Honor. That's what I'm worried about. I don't want them to ever go with some like really complicated, like hyper realistic way of doing combat.
Yeah, 'cause
You kind of
it's
negate
kind of-
stats in a way when you have like the tactical dance of fighting. So I understand that. It's like
Yeah,
your stats
exactly.
don't come into play if there's so many, if it comes down to reactions a lot of the time, then
But then again, if they did have attributes in there properly, there are things like you can prioritize, like, if speed affected how quick you can, like, do you know what I mean? The skill element of it versus something that's being like if you want to be a big tank that just kind of don't care about it as much or go run in an attack. But yeah, it gets a little.
How do you feel about the potential of, in games like Skyrim, the reality is it doesn't matter what build you want to be, but at the end of the day, you're going to be incredible at everything. Like, I kind of think it would be a better experience if you were forced to decide between skills. We were just talking about it with the quick cast. I feel like you should either be able to be a very good mage or be able to be a very good warrior. I think that's better for replayability.
I think a good way to do it is, instead of limiting via skills or perks, if they had proper attributes there and limited in terms of attributes, so you can only be... So if to be a maxed out mage is dependent on your intelligence, you can't max out your intelligence as well as your strength and stuff. So there's just at least one layer of limiting a factor. But that gives more racial diversity, but it's not the be all and end all. Like, you still have a good amount of flexibility.
I wouldn't want to limit freedom too much as I do like imposing some restrictions. And like you kind of touched on, you could do it with perks. Like, if you look at some of the perk mods, for example, what they do is they just make each skill tree way more fleshed out. So it's kind of like you have to invest a lot of your perk points into a certain tree if you want to be the master of that tree and have everything that tree has to offer. If you want to spread your perk points more thinly and be, kind of good at everything, you can, but you'll never be the master at everything in the sense of different perks that potentially unlock new abilities or different powers and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways to do it. It's just walking that fine line of not giving too much restriction, but at the same time not having a thing where everyone's just this big flowy, wheezy wazy, like nothing has any kind of classification or drawback or advancement. Because I'm a big fan of, we should get back to Magic, to be honest, but I am a big fan of strong drawbacks and bonuses for races. Like we talked about Argonians, how their poison and disease resistance was watered down as the games went on and things like that.
Yeah, just the last thing on that is the problem with but like the perks thing, to do it right, they've got to make sure that it does actually require a worthwhile, like a solid investment to actually get good at. Because, for example, you can just say you're going to get all your skills to 100, but you're not going to get all the perks, but you can just drop 5 perks into one-handed, and you might not have the sprint attack or something, but slash, it's just as powerful. You know what I mean?
And strength, and if they had a strength attribute, it would be a bit different for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
I don't really mind that much, especially being a single-player game, but I do like the idea that attributes would add a little bit more complexity into things, or even a class system. Like kind of with tag skills almost.
Yeah. Anyway, let's
get back to Magic.
Yeah, we'll dive back into the Magic. We'll start talking about some of the outliers, I guess. And I'll quickly bring up, there is Soul Magic, the obscure magic based around souls and vestiges. But that, to me, just sounds like mysticism. I may as well group that in with mysticism, like manipulation of magic itself, or souls, like it's been known in the lore. So it's not really that interesting of a magic. But let's get to, obviously, like one that everyone really, really likes, which is necromancy, while we're on the topic of manipulating souls and stuff like that. So
necromancy is kind of like one of the more evil schools, you could call it, depending on your code of ethics and morals. But in a lot of the descriptions you hear about it, you are really just toying with the soul of someone who's trying to go to the afterlife. Like there is a reason that in the Elder Scrolls universe there are so many anti-necromancer groups that are set up, to stop them from playing with the corpses of the dead and their souls and interfering with that natural process and the cycles of life and death and the afterlife.
And in history, it's been outlawed and then legalized and then outlawed again and stuff like that. And like in the time of Skyrim, it's not, the locals don't like it, as Phineas says, Phineas Gestor, but you can understandably so, like, it's possible, I guess, to be an ethical necromancer, like only the corpses of the deceased, perhaps. But it depends on how the like naturally deceased, but it depends on how the whole soul works with that particular thing of necromancy. Like, for example, you could make the argument if you're just inhabiting a body with like a placeholder soul, like you're kind of puppeteering a corpse. That's not really bad. But if you are like, painfully drawing someone's soul back from,
in some ways, I think it's always unethical. I don't think you can. Like, it depends on your set of beliefs. Obviously, if you're like tormenting a soul, that's way worse. But remember, unless it's some, base animal that no one really cares about, like some deer just died in the forest. But the second it's a mortal person, that's somebody's family member that you're playing with.
You almost need consent, like kind of like organ donor situation.
Yeah.
Because
that's
because I think
fine.
a fundamental thing for mortals, just real world and Elder Scrolls, you can see it in a bunch of cultures, is their burial rites. It's so important. You've got Arcane in some situations, and the way the Dunmer do it is very, it's following. It's almost ritualistic, And if you kind of deprive a mortal of that path, that the closure of their existence, then people find it disgusting in the same way that people find cannibalism disgusting.
Yeah, and I guess as well, like, it doesn't really matter whether or not the afterlife is involved at all. I mean, otherwise you could have a situation here on Earth where it's like, oh, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in the afterlife, so I'm allowed to play with dead people. It's like, no. It's like, even if that's the case, let's just pretend to say, okay, there's no afterlife. Let's say that's 100% confirmed. It's still not okay.
Yeah,
like,
even if souls weren't
what I mean?
involved, I think people would still be against it, because it's the visual, the visceral sense of raising the physical vessel for this soul up from the dead. Even though, if you say that the soul's not involved, then it's completely, it's technically completely fine, and nobody's being harmed in the process. You don't want to see it. You don't want to see.
But I guess It just depends. It's literally only just because I guess it's a cultural thing around the burial stuff.
100%, but that's what affects what morals are.
Yeah, sure. But that's what I'm saying. But through a wood elf lens or an Argonian lens, you could make the case it's quite moral. In the same way that they're prepared to eat a corpse, they're like, oh, let's just use it. It's actually getting a function still, as opposed to, not that this is necessarily the most wood elf thing, but you could have a cultural preset of a wood elf and then sort of come to that conclusion. Or same as the Argonian, who are like really, they're kind of into the recycling of life and they're using it rather than this sort of enshrining and entombing.
Yeah, or I mean, you look at what the Dark Elves do and all their ancestor worship and kind of calling up a ghost, get a ghost on the line. Hello, we need some advice.
Well, they kind of keep them around, yeah.
Yeah, then that's different. But so I guess, like anything, I mean, we don't want to get into a whole moral discussion, but if it's a group of people who probably don't want their body to be touched after death, then, don't do it.
But it's the kind of thing when you get to it, it's like, oh, what if it's a bunch of criminals? A whole bunch of bandit criminals and stuff using it then, you know what I mean, that have slaughtered a whole village. It's the kind of thing where, and obviously you can get into like moral relativism.
That's what I mean, yeah. Like,
and so on. But what I'm saying is you can kind of see how, like, imagine Phineas Gestor rises a bunch of bandits or something. I wouldn't necessarily go, oh, you immoral, crazy, disgusting person straight away,
I probably would.
Yeah,
but
I feel like it's different. When you're in the game, you don't care. But like right now, if someone just went up and dug up a whole bunch of like,
but he's not digging
criminals.
It up, killing bandits.
Yeah,
raising them.
It depends what the use is anyway. If you're raising them to, like, whoever raises a corpse to do something good.
I don't know, to fight just other bandits.
Yeah, it's cheap labor, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like they're always involved in bad things.
Yeah, well, I mean, places use them like cheap. It's not. I just don't. What I was saying, my point was that they're not always. I feel like there are, like, most of the time they do, but there are like outliers and stuff where it's possible.
I feel like it's like that with anything though. You can always go, here's one exception to the rule.
No, but what I'm saying is, like, it's not like falling to the dark side in Star Wars and you get corrupted by using necromancy and your eyes turn yellow and you get vein stuff. It really is just like it's a type of magic and you can use it, and it's just often the ways that it's going, it can lead to a dark moral.
I think messing with the cycle of life and death in the Elder Scrolls is always going to be taboo, and it even is with the path to lichdom, like. Even if you're only messing with yourself, if you harmed no others in the process, it would still be despicable to most people because you're you're interrupting the natural way of things, mortality.
Yeah. But, they use that argument to sort of be like, well, you shouldn't use healing potions and stuff.
I mean,
because you're interrupting the
it's a lot about perception.
And I mean, people do that. Yeah.
It's about perception.
Yeah, that's not really my argument. Although with liches, they're known to have this ritual where they have to extract all these souls as painfully as possible, like on purpose in a malicious way to like power them.
And to clarify, like the without consent part of it, the body part, like if it's just the body, it changes it a bit. And this is the problem with the necromancy lore. It kind of like ups and downs a bit.
Well, I think we're going to kind of go into flesh magic then, because there's this idea that it's necromancy. The idea that the fresher the corpse is, the more the soul is kind of still there. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I guess that's like there's kind of like a physical tethering to it, I guess, with that idea. But like, I think for the most part, the big problem is the defilement of the souls and stuff like that. And to be honest, necromancy, if it is to deal with a soul, that's a completely different scenario. So like we're trying to say, but I think the lore's just kind of contrived, and they wanted to add in necromancy in Skyrim to be like a bit more chill, so that you can do it and not feel heaps evil. And it's like, no, but the idea is you're bringing back this, you know what I mean?
You're playing with a mortal soul. And then I guess we'll talk about, there's this one text that I hate with a passion in the Elder Scrolls Online, because it added this one little sentence which just messed with everything. But of course you can just go kind of unreliable narrator and that this scholar is wrong. But they're basically talking about kind of flesh magic, kind of necromancy, and they're saying that sometimes, a skeleton or a flesh atronach, it's imbued with a minor Daedric essence, is the quote. And I think it said often a minor Daedric essence. And then it talked about, it wasn't just flesh atronachs though, it was talking about other things like skeletons and stuff. And it's kind of like, well, maybe you can rationalize it and say, if it's a really fresh corpse, you're still playing with the mortal soul that's trying to leave the body. But if it's full on just skull and bones, then the way that you reanimate it isn't with a mortal soul, and it is with whatever this minor Daedric essence is. But gosh, I just hate that text, because it goes against what everything on necromancy throughout all the other lore books and stuff is meant to be. When you're buried, you're far departed, but there's all these groups that would, protect the body, and orders that would have, the rights to arcade to make sure that it can't be tampered with and
they kind of made it a little convoluted for a really poor reason, just so they could just add in some like enemies that you don't, I guess, or summons and stuff that you don't have to feel bad about, or like, so you don't feel like it's just, you know what, the safest thing is to just assume necromancy's evil. That's the safest side of the pillar, to just go necromancy's evil, like it's always like a bad thing morally.
Well, I mean, on a stats basis as well, you could kind of just assess the situation and be like, even if you don't know for sure whether or not it's evil, that's probably why you shouldn't do it, because you don't know. Like, and if you have to go, oh, is this evil or not? And it like kind of, a lot of the evidence says probably is, and you do it, then you've taken a chance on probably is evil, which to me is kind of like a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a mix up. But yeah, did you want to continue about, I guess,
flesh magic?
Yeah.
Flesh magic's really complicated. Because in the Elder Scrolls Online, they kind of confused it by having Abnathan say, it's so simple, a child of 5 could do it, and you go and get these fleshy parts and put them in this, what to me looks like a necromancy circle, because it's themed the color of all the necromancy magic in Elder Scrolls Online, that bluey aqua color. And then you go over to a ritual book and raise your hands above it, and a flesh atronach comes out of the ground, and he says, we'll make a necromancer of you yet. And it's like, okay. And then you go to the Shivering Isles, and you've got Realmina Verenum saying, I have discovered the 6th element, flesh, hidden by virtue of its own self-awareness and all this stuff. And what she does is very similar, but it looks way more complicated. And that's meant to be the soul of a Daedra. And she's stitched together all these different body parts, but there's also carvings on them that may have some kind of protective purpose. We don't know, but there's carvings all over them. They have the armor, which may be to kind of bind it all together, because it's not an effective armor. It's around the neck, the ankles, the wrists, a bit on the torso, probably just because it looks cool. But, they have all of that. and then that's imbued with like the soul of a Daedra. And as we see with the Gatekeeper, that's a super powerful flesh magic entity that's really hard to kill and has a really complicated ritual needing ingredients from Sheogorath's realm, you know, blood liqueur, osseous marrow, and all this stuff.
It's kind of I think it's as simple as they got it confused in Elder Scrolls Online, or not confused. They just sort of took the lore in a direction that's kind of contradictory, or just the easiest way to separate it is that there is such thing as, oh, this is like a Frankenstein necromancy flesh atronach, and then there's the really powerful Daedric flesh atronachs that were made in the Shivering Isles. But like that's just, you know, that's a cope to try and like deal with the design decisions.
But it can also just be, like we were talking about at the start of the podcast, a difference in classification. True. It could be a flesh magic, a very simple one, because it is quite similar to necromancy in ways. You know, you're getting dead things and putting it together and bringing it to life, or animating it in a way. It's just one of it classically is done with a mortal's soul, and one is imbued with a Daedra's soul. The other thing about the ones in the Isles, which is different, is they have this item called Void Essence on their body, which no one knows what Void Essence is. Perhaps it is from the Void, you know, as the name kind of hints at. But when you see the failed experiments, the flesh atronachs in her, I guess, torture chamber ruins in Zarselm, they don't have void essence. So it seems to be like a crucial element of making the flesh atronachs that she makes. And she also calls them true flesh. So perhaps it is like a more advanced version than what has gone on in the past. But we know in Elder Scrolls Online, Manamako made the first flesh Colossus, which is like just a really big Elder Scrolls Online flesh atronach. Yeah. But it gets all confusing because then they summon flesh atronachs even in Oblivion. So you don't know are you just pulling them from Sheogorath's realm or what. There's also the thing with Elder Scrolls Online magic is you can't take it all as canon, because a lot of them are just abilities that are like, oh, that's cool. You know, you made a flesh atronach come out of the ground and pound the floor and then disappear. You know, it's kind of just like a power.
Yeah, it's the same as it's just that classic separating the gamified looking elements from same reasons, like, you know, we don't take every mount and you know, cosmetics seriously, you know. But yeah, definitely you guys should really check out the flesh magic video.
Yeah, I go super deep on it, and we also talk about Galathil's flesh magic, which almost seems like perhaps a combination of alteration and restoration stuff, how she carves up your face with the flesh sculptor's knife. She mentions that there's a blade involved, and then, unless she's being metaphorical, and then kind of heals it to look different and however you want. And also changes your body. I know it's just a gameplay mechanic, like you can change your muscle, but you could see that as like almost like a bodybuilder process of breaking down the muscles rapidly and then regrowing them bigger, but with magic. If you wanted to rationalize it all, there's heaps of different things, but definitely check out the flesh magic video, because we don't have 20 minutes just for flesh magic here.
Yeah, well, I guess since we're kind of in a similar realm, we can start talking about blood magic. So blood magic most commonly has been talked about in regards to vampires. And if you were to talk about like blood magic in real life, not that it's real, but people believed and stuff. It all comes from the central idea that blood is like, you know, it is the water that gives life. It's the essence. It's the stuff that flows through your whole body. And in that, a lot of cultures believe that there is an innate power to that. And so using that blood in blood magic is essentially, it's kind of like any other magic really, except it's kind of like using blood as its source. So you get the vampires, you know, a lot of this is added by the vampire lord form and stuff, but there are other, and you can sort of think about, there are like the bloodlines of vampires which all have their own unique traits. So there's these specific powers that is contained within the blood, but there are also blood magic rituals and stuff that differ, and like blood sacrifices amongst different cultures and so on. And
I mean, there's also the example of in Skyrim, you make a little blood sacrifice to open the door at
so there's like a magical so I think a lot of it comes from some magical device or something detecting the blood. It's using the magic within blood as almost like like an identifier, that door kind of thing. You know, you have to have dragon blood.
Yeah, it's Skyhaven Temple. But I mean, obviously that's some kind of magic recognition of the blood. I don't think it's some kind of scientific Dwemer machine. No. You know, it feels very arcane.
But then there's all of the vampire stuff and their blood magic and blood use. It's one of those very vague things, to be honest. Do you know what makes blood magic? It involves blood, the red liquid.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much it. Like there's nothing, because in the vampire lord form, when you use blood magic, you're still using Magicka to do it. So I think it's more creative or interesting to think about it as blood magic being the actual magic that's contained within bloodlines and stuff like that. So, for example, the Dragonborn and their dragon blood, or the vampires and their bloodlines. And you could even argue it's in different things. Like, I'd be interested to see what else they could do with it in the lore, like what other mystical bloodlines or something there are with power. Like, if you were to extrapolate that further, you could even look at how different races have different innate abilities because of, like, you could say, because of their blood. Bretons have elven blood in their veins, and that is why they've got greater magical affinity, even despite looking more human-like. So I think that's pretty much all of blood magic. I don't know how much
there's different powers and stuff again, but it kind of comes into that powers category, where it's like, what is this?
Well, we can quickly address those as well. So, like, as we've been talking about everything that deals with Magicka sourced and the manipulation of Magicka to get whatever effect you want. But there are some things like the thumb of the Nords, the Shihai spirit sword stuff of the Ansei and the Yakuta. The Ki is offhand mentioned about the Akaviri doing something similar, but and then also tonal architecture. But these are all sort of like the way that you'd think about it. It's not less academic, but it's a very introspective sort of meditative thing that you get at these powers through enlightenment. Because the Greybeards, they sit there and study on the thumb, or they meditate about it, rather than kind of like reading about the technicality of it in books and stuff. It's all very introspective, intuitive enlightenment.
It comes back to mysticism when we were talking about it and defining it. It's like, it's very much the magic is there to be found. It's all about looking inside and trying to find these patterns so that you can channel them, which is when you think of the Shihai, the sword singers is once they master this art well enough, purely by focusing their minds, they're conjuring these spirit swords that are immensely powerful. So it kind of all draws back at the end. And it's like Michael said at the very beginning, it's like, if you take away the rigid, the rules associated with casting spells, then it's actually pretty incredible what you can discover by simply understanding that the limit of looking into magic can be more than learning a fireball spell. Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually really favor, I like my magic mythical. I like mythical magic. That's why I like the Thum and Shihai and stuff way more, or I like mysticism even. But the more sort of codified, fireball, Kamehameha, more of that kind of stuff, I get a little bit it's still cool, but it just becomes a little dry.
Yeah, it's like, how many points of Magicka will it cost to use this? It's like, this is all stuff that is understandably needed for game mechanics, but takes the magic out of magic.
Yeah.
A little bit. I will say there is another magic type we haven't talked about, and that's shadow magic.
Oh, yes. Shadow magic.
So, Azra Nightwielder discovered that shadow was not simply an absence of light, but a reflection of possible worlds created by forces in conflict. So that's all really interesting, and we kind of touched on it in the Nocturnal podcast a bit, the idea of shadows and her having shadow magic.
But it kind of comes down to there's that nice poetic bit, but then it kind of comes to what's shadow magic? It involves shadows.
And dark, kind of purpley and black cloudy stuff. But it's supposed to be super powerful. I mean, there's this thing that says shadow magic rivals even the power of the Elder Scrolls themselves, having the power to potentially change the past, present, and future through the manipulation of shadow. It has the capabilities of reaching into and affecting the multiverse.
It's kind of like, when we talk about shadows with Nocturnal and the conflicting forces of Anu and Padamai, it's very much like finding pockets of chaos. That's kind of what shadows are, when you have the ineffable light and the great darkness, and they're interplaying, and these shadows are, it's the kind of, it's almost like, raw raw energy to be channeled, and it can only really be philosophical when you look at something as basic as shadow magic without any information. It's mostly aesthetic.
It was also mentioned in the sea slowed kind of stuff as well, that it was used there. But again, like you said, it is kind of just seems aesthetic at this point. Like we don't know a whole bunch about it.
Yeah. I don't know. Did you guys have anything else to say on it? Because by the way, guys, just to preface this for you all. Well,
at the end,
post-face.
Yeah.
To post-face it. I don't know if that's a word, but this is we just wanted to touch on like magic in a general explanation, and so you guys all have a firm idea of what the different kind of schools are and how it is actually arbitrary, and how, you know, basically how things it's just magic really a lot of the time. It's like, because, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But we will do other podcasts on magic, more magic topics specifically. Like there are things that we touched on in this podcast that we could have entire podcasts about. You know, like we did the lesser known beast races or beast folk. We can have the lesser known magic types and do a whole podcast on it. But this one's kind of like a big primer podcast.
Yeah, for someone who has no idea. And then like mysticism, like I kind of think of that, mysticism / necromancy as one big podcast could be a pretty cool discussion. Like, because we'll go, if we were to do those, we'll go a bit more into the actual like history of their creation.
Yeah.
So we'd be bringing up the Sigic Order a lot more and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
Otherwise, if we tried to do everything in one, we'd have a 4-hour podcast, I reckon, or more. But yeah, so I guess thanks everyone for watching. We really appreciate it that you're all giving us support for these podcasts and leaving your comments, liking the video, following us on Twitter. It's all a lot of fun, to be honest. Like it's a good way as well to learn more about the universe for ourselves.
Yeah, it gives us more ideas because when you have to explain it to someone else, it kind of allows you to reflect on it in a different way versus if you've just reading it or something like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. It's been fun. It's Michael, Scott, and Drew, and we look forward to nerding out with you all again very soon.